Hello and welcome back to Classic Vinyl Podcast and our Meet the Beatles series. Of course, this is the series where we're doing all the Beatles releases in chronological history. I am one of your hosts, Justin. I'm here with my co-host, Tyler.
I have arrived.
And of course, I'm also trying to introduce Tyler to the Beatles, and due to the best of our knowledge, the Beatles in chronological history as they came out in the UK. We're on to the Beatles and their Long Tall Sally EP, and today we're going to do the songs Long Tall Sally and I Call Your Name. And I'm not really going to give any history on the Beatles because, of course, if you're listening to this, I'm assuming you either know the history of the Beatles or you can go listen to one of our earlier episodes. But they are formed of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. Best-selling band of all time. My favorite band of all time. Trying to get them to be Tyler's favorite band, or at least get him a little more knowledgeable on them. But they're certainly the most influential band of all time, whether you like them or not.
Oh, yeah, and I will fight anybody that says otherwise.
And you better be careful with that.
I could get my ass kicked here, huh?
You could.
Yeah.
But let's get on to the Long Tall Sally. Why don't you tell me, Tyler, what is your history with this song? We listened to it a few times tonight.
It certainly introduced me to the Beatles tonight. I haven't consciously heard Long Tall Sally. I've heard the name, but I haven't really sat and listened to this song before. Either the A-side or the B-side.
Well, and so these aren't A-sides or B-sides. This was off an EP, but we'll get to that. So should we get to the song review then?
Yes.
And now it's time for the song review.
Okay, so we're going to do Long Tall Sally first. So this song was released on April 10th of 1964 in the U.S. and June 19th of 1964 in the U.K. It was actually released earlier in the U.S. It was originally written by Anotrice Johnson, Robert Blackman, and Richard Penniman, also known as Little Richard.
Woo!
Something like that.
Something like that.
The original version of this song was released in 1956 by Little Richard, and this is Little Richard's most well-known hit and his biggest hit he's ever had. So as far as the Beatles are concerned, they recorded this at EMI Studios in London, and it was produced by George Martin, like pretty much all of their music, during the Hard Day's Night album sessions. So they had played it live so much, because this was a staple of their live set, that when they went into the studio, it took them one take to record it. So what we listened to was one and done.
These guys love this song, and you can tell it.
Yeah. So you've got Paul McCartney on lead vocals, and this song was actually recorded the same day as I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, and the other song we're doing today, I Call Your Name. In the UK, this was released on the Long Tall Sally EP, and in the US, it was released on, those famous Beatles U.S. albums that a lot of people of that age know them better as, but it was released on the Beatles' second album. That was the name of the album, the Beatles' second album. So in Canada, it was released on a full-length album titled Long Tall Sally. The Beatles' release history is really convoluted, and you can dig pretty deep into it. So it is not, if you're looking for the song nowadays, it is found on Past Masters' album, and it's also found on their Live at the BBC, the live version, and Live at the Hollywood Bowl live version as well, obviously. This is one of the longest lasting songs in all of the Beatles live sets for the time they played. They pretty much played it from the time they were the Quarrymen in 1957, all up until their last concert in August of 1966. So this was a staple. They knew how to play it, which makes complete sense when they went in and laid it down in 1964 that they did it in one take. And the Beatles, they absolutely adored Little Richard, and especially Paul McCartney. And I mean, you can tell that when you hear his voice in this. It's him mimicking and trying to sound like Little Richard and
doing a much better job than I did.
Well, yeah, doing a lot better job than you did. But I think Paul McCartney does a better job of Little Richard than Little Richard does. But that's coming from
He might.
That's coming from a superb Beatles fan, and obviously he would even have that sound if it weren't for Little Richard. But anytime they had any songs of Little Richard's they remade, you had McCartney singing the lead on them. So on this track, you've got Lennon playing his 1958 Rickenbacker 325. Paul's got his 501 Hofner bass, and George is playing his 63 Gretsch Country Gentleman. You've also got George Martin playing piano on this track. And one thing that is debated, you've got John Lennon and George Harrison supposedly splitting the lead guitar duties. Lennon with the first solo, it said, and Harrison with the second. I don't know. With them recording that in one take, that's hard to believe. But the one thing that is true is when they played it live, that's how they did it. They split the solos. So I think that's why people say it is, but I kind of think from the record I'm hearing just Harrison, but who knows? It's really split.
Still sounds really good.
It does. For years, as far as what this song's about, people thought this song was about a cross-dresser, but although it was a real person, that was not the case. Little Richard has explained that this gal, she was a friend of the family who was always drinking whiskey. She claimed to have a cold, and so she drank hot toddies all day, because that's what you do, I've got a cold.
Yeah, you gotta chase it with some whiskey.
Yeah, I've got to have my medicine.
Yeah.
And he also claimed that she was tall and ugly with two cockeyed teeth. So she was having an affair with John, who was married to Mary, who they called Short Fat Fanny.
Nice. And Mary was, or not Mary, but Sally was, he said she was bald.
Yeah. Bald-headed Sally, yeah.
She sounds really hard on the eyes, except for she's long and tall, right?
Yeah, long, tall, and bald, yeah. And
always smells of rum.
With crooked teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So John and Mary would get in fights on the weekends, and when he saw her coming, he would duck back into the little alley to avoid her. And that's all explained in the song. It's pretty self-explanatory. Mm-hmm. But this song has been, not only covered by the Beatles, but all the British acts in the early 60s covered it. But Molly Hatchet covered it in the 70s. The Kinks have covered it, a ton of others. But so what are your thoughts on Long Tall Sally after hearing this song for the first time? And we did listen to it a couple times. We also listened to it live from the Beatles, and we also listened to Little Richard's version of this. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on this song?
We really gave it a thorough going over.
We did.
And I had so much fun with this song. This song, for something that I don't think I've ever really listened to it before, I might have heard bits and pieces here and there, but boy, you can just hear them having so much fun right from the very opening. There's like this vocal scream from Paul that he's just wailing out in Little Richard style. And this is very much like your classic 1950s style rock and roll, almost a juke joint style rock and roll. Man, what a fun song to dance to and get moving around. This is a twisting song. This is a fun song. These guys are just having the time. They're having a ball, and you can tell. And it's a funny song too. It's about, Uncle John and Aunt Mary, and he's been running around on Aunt Mary with Long Tall Sally, and Aunt Mary is mad. And anytime she comes looking for Uncle John, he ducks down the alleyway because, he don't want to get beaten up over, running around with Long Tall Sally. But I gotta say, this thing is just so much fun to listen to. Everybody's playing their instrument. You can really tell that this is a song that these guys enjoy as a band. They have fun playing it. They have fun singing it. This is one of their staples. This is a song that they play for them. And the rest of the audience, whoever hears it, they're just lucky to listen in because these guys are just having a great time. And it's so fun to listen to. This is a little different, though, than the Beatles that I'm accustomed to. It sounds like a Little Richard song. But even so, boy, these guys did a great job on it, and I'm having a hard time finding anything critical to say because the only thing I could say is, well, they didn't write this one, but boy, they took it and made it a Beatles song, and I'm really impressed with that. What are your thoughts on Long Tall Sally?
Well, I think you hit the nail right on the head right there. I think this is nearly a perfect song, and probably the only critique of it would be it's not their song. I don't know if that's really even a critique because you go back to the 50s and 60s, a lot of people weren't writing their songs, and that's something the Beatles definitely brought in a little bit. I think the one thing you can say about this song, there's actually many I can say, but the vocals from McCartney in this are amazing. Mm-hmm. He sounds so perfect in this. I love the way Paul can do different vocals, and what he was doing here was he did an amazing job. It'd be kind of interesting to hear Lennon sing it and see how he'd bring it, but I don't think he could scream like McCartney could. I like how the song goes straight into the vocal. It's very, very strong, straight in, I'm going to tell Aunt Mary about Uncle John. It goes straight into that. The rhythm work in this song is absolutely amazing. It's got fantastic solos, the first and the second. I think the second's even better than the first. The bass is fantastic in it. Ringo keeps perfect time in this. There's nothing I can say bad about this song. It's straight rock and roll. It's of the time. You can see why this was a staple of the band, why they enjoyed playing it, and other than the fact that they didn't write it, and I don't care that they didn't, really, It's a very, very strong song, and it's too bad that it was only released in the U.S. on an album and not released as a single. But yeah, I mean, an amazing song, without a doubt. So that moves us on to the other song, I Call Your Name. Now, let me give you a little history on this one. This one was also released on April 10th of 1964 in the U.S., and June 19th of 1964 in the UK. Obviously, it was the same thing. It was released in the UK on the Long Tall Sally EP. It was released in the US on the Beatles' second album, and it was released on the Long Tall Sally album in Canada. Now, this was written by Lennon and McCartney, but it's mainly a Lennon composition. It's possibly one of Lennon's earliest songs because he has said that he wrote this before the Beatles even existed, but they've talked to Paul, and Paul says he helped him finish it up, so who really knows? And you've got John Lennon on lead vocals on this. This one was also recorded at EMI Studios in London and produced by George Martin. This one was recorded the same day as I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, and of course the song we already talked about, Long Tall Sally. Now, unlike Long Tall Sally that took one take to get down, this one took them a ton of takes, a full 7 takes. Yeah, which is nothing compared to what you see now or what they went through on their later music. I mean, that's literally nothing, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But this was actually the only Lennon-McCartney original song on the Long Tall Sally EP. Those 4 songs. This was the only one written by them. This can be found today on the Past Masters album, just like Long Tall Sally. Now, this was first released as a single from one of Brian Epstein's other bands, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, in July of 1963. It was a B-side of their song Bad to Me. And that was kind of common with Lennon and McCartney. There were quite a few of their songs they wrote and give to other bands, especially bands that Brian Epstein was managing at the time. There is a John Lennon quote about this song, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying when he wrote it. He said, "That was my song when there was no Beatles and no group. I just had it laying around. It was my effort as a kind of a blues originally, and then I wrote the middle 8 just to stick it in the album when it came out years later. The first part that was been written before Hamburg even," he said, before they were in Germany, and it was one of his first attempts at a song, according to him. So, and one thing that's kind of interesting about this and something a lot of people miss out is it does have a guitar solo in the middle of this thing by George Harrison that's reminiscent of ska. It's like ska music. It's kind of interesting, especially from the Beatles this early. Now, this song's also been covered by many famous bands, including the Mamas and the Papas, the Buckinghams, Tom Waits, and Ringo Starr. The Beatles drummer actually re-recorded it in 1990 with him singing on it. So
he stole it from John Lennon.
He did. So before we go into what you think of this song, do you have any history with this song? I think you said this
Not
was
at
the
all.
first time listening to this one as well.
Yeah, this is very much a first for me. I don't recognize this song at all.
Okay, well, after listening to it a couple times, we actually listened to this one 3 times. What are your thoughts on I Call Your Name?
You know, it's got a peppy little beat to it. It's got that bopping guitar that is very iconic of the 60s. In fact, it's got that kind of guitar style that if you watch any movie from the 60s, a lot of times the background, the music, the soundtrack will have that bopping guitar to it. Bow, bow, you know?
Well, I think that's the early British invasion sound in a way.
Seems like it.
That become very popular, obviously.
And these guys are setting the trend. This song is all about trendsetter, but there's something so personal about this because it is a heartbreak song. This is a song about, John Lennon. He screwed up and she left him, and now he's pining for her, but rather than cry at night, he just sits there calling her name because he misses her so bad and he wishes that he could unscrew it up, but he can't, and she's gone, and it hurts. So it feels really personal, and I get that sense from this, that this is John Lennon opening a little window to his soul for us, and we get a glimpse of the inner, most intimate part of John Lennon.
Where he said this was one of the earliest songs he has written, it makes you wonder, is that just kind of puppy teenage love that he's writing about at the time, 14, 15 years old, or what?
Yeah, could be, but then again, it's also just, there is a refinement to this. That it's and maybe that refinement came later on with some work on it with the help of Paul. Sure, I can buy that, but I also understand that whole thing of writing songs for other bands to perform or to record. There's a lot of swapping going on, and this is like an era of change between the 50s and the 60s, and you get these trends that start to come out and these patterns, and so the Beatles became some front runners in setting a lot of reinventing things or doing things a different way. And I have to admire that, have to respect it. But with this song, it's just so excellently performed, even though it took 7 takes. Yeah, like you say, that's nothing today. But back then, you can really see the difference. That this is a song that they wanted to put it out there, but they didn't have as much practice on it. So they had to try it a few times. They did a good job with it. I thoroughly enjoyed this song. What about you, Justin? Where you think on this one?
Well, I really enjoyed this song as well. What's kind of interesting about the songs that fall onto past masters that were either singles only or, they're on this EP or whatever, it's kind of neat because I like listening to the albums. And so these are songs I visit a little less. It's a very interesting song. I think it's got a decent guitar intro. And first of all, you've got Lennon playing his Rickenbacker 325 again. Paul's with his 501 Hofner. And George is actually playing his 360 12-string Rickenbacker on this one. Lennon's vocal's great in this. It's a doubled vocal, which pretty much from this point forward, that's all Lennon did. He had to have his vocals doubled. That's the sound he wanted. It's got another good bass line from Paul, like always. It's got a really good simple solo but from George, but it fits perfectly on this. I really like it. Once again, Ringo keeping great time. It's got a little cowbell before each chorus. That's kind of an interesting addition. That's probably the one criticism I could say. I could do without that, but listen to these songs for so long, that's the only way I know it. So it's a little nitpicky, stupid thing, The fade out, I kind of wish it didn't fade out, but if you've listened to this podcast before, I'm not a huge fan of fade outs, but it just depends on how it's done. But this is a very strong song. And what I like about it is just like what I said before, I like the fact that this isn't one that pops up on playlist or when I throw albums on, when I throw a vinyl on the record player here and there. I just don't hear this one as often, so it's good to hear it, and especially to hear Long Tall Sally, because that song from being early 60s just simply rocks. So do you want to get the song ratings?
I do.
Song rating.
Okay, if this is your first episode, we have a rating system that's 0 to 10, 10 being excellent and 5 being in the middle. To start off with Long Tall Sally, I give that one a very solid 8. I knock it down just because I'm listening to a Beatles version of a Little Richard song. But then again, it's still a really excellent Beatles song. And I feel bad knocking it down to an 8 because, man, it's fun. I think that I was too harsh on it. I should have bumped this up to a 9. But then again, I refuse to revamp my ratings after discussion. So
yeah, you don't want to give in to the pressure.
Yeah, I gotta stick with my gut at an 8, but still it deserves higher than that, and it at least deserves an 8. This is a great song. Where do you put this one?
This song, I'm going to be kind of the same as you. I knock it down a point. Because I guess simply because it wasn't written by them, which is silly, but I rate this song a 9. I think it's nearly a perfect song from the vocals, the instruments, everything, and the fact that I don't hear it that often. Sitting down here listening to it today, it's just amazing how powerful the song is.
It keeps it special, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's a very, very powerful song. So I rate this one a 9. So on the second song, I Call Your Name, where are you at on that one?
I Call Your Name, I put that one at a 9. Because it is such a window to John Lennon's soul. And I think it is a trend-setting song. You hear a lot of these sounds that these are going to be very iconic sounds from the guitar throughout the 60s. And this is the Beatles setting a trend. I love it. It's such a significant moment to be able to hear that and watch the Beatles do what they do. They're just amazing. Where do you put that one?
Yeah, I'm not quite as high on this one as you are. I rate this one an 8, and I'm probably rating it a little bit on a curve with the Beatles against themselves, of course. I think it's got an excellent guitar in it. I think the Lennon vocal is very, very strong. Once again, it's a doubled vocal, and it sounds amazing. I think Lennon has, especially get later years, and we'll get into that at some point, but he has a haunting vocal, which I enjoy his voice. But let's be honest, I'm a huge Beatles fan, so I enjoy Paul's voice. I enjoy all of them.
Yeah.
But this song, The only critique I really have of it is maybe the cowbell could have been left off, but who cares, right? And I don't really like the fade out. But other than that, this is a very strong song. And just like Long Tall Sally, it's one I don't hear very often. So it in some ways is a little more special to me there. I think it's a very, very strong song and I enjoy it.
I feel kind of dumb because I missed the cowbell. I didn't even pick it up.
Yeah.
But I'm not as much of a musician as you are, so of course I'm not going to pick that up.
Well, I'm definitely not a cowbell musician.
I mean, if anything, like Christopher Walken says on Saturday Night Live, we need more cowbell.
Well, I disagree with him, but...
Well, Christopher Walken's wrong.
Well, that's the Beatles and Long Tall Sally and I Call Your Name on our Meet the Beatles series. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, certainly send them to us at classicvinylpodcast@gmail.com. And we really appreciate you listening. And until next time, we'll see you later.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to Classic Vinyl Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Classic Vinyl Podcast for updates and also share us with your music-loving friends.